Look at the rigid stone walls dividing these ancient agricultural terraces. In the biblical legal system, humans face a unique jurisdictional problem. How do you permanently transfer an asset to God if you do not permanently own it yourself? Under the laws of Leviticus, absolute private land ownership does not exist. Individuals are effectively tenants on divine real estate, holding temporary rights to work the soil. This animated diagram maps the mechanism behind that temporary ownership, the Yovel, or Jubilee cycle. Every 50 years, a mandatory socio-economic reset forces all leased or sold land rights to revert back to their original ancestral families. If an individual attempts to engage in hekdesh, the legal mechanism of consecrating personal property to the temple treasury, that transaction collides directly with this timeline. The Yovel boundary remains impassable. The legal friction is straightforward. Consecrating an asset requires absolute title. You cannot donate a permanent right that you do not legally possess. By examining the 11th century commentary of Rashi on Leviticus chapter 27, verses 22 through 28, we can deconstruct exactly how earthly property rights restrict an individual's ability to transact with the divine. The boundaries of religious consecration are ultimately drawn by the strict boundaries of legal ownership. In this system, precise jurisprudence overrides pious intention. Verse 22 introduces a specific case study to test these boundaries, the consecration of a Sdeh Mikneh, which translates to a purchased field. This diagram breaks down its legal anatomy. A purchased field carries a split title. The buyer holds the temporary usufruct, while the permanent ancestral title remains with the family. When consecrating this field to the temple, only the rights they actually own move. The ancestral title remains firmly anchored. Rashi points out a critical statutory distinction here. Because the temple only acquires this partial deed, the purchased field is not divided among the priests when the Jubilee year arrives, unlike standard ancestral land. The logic is rooted in the limitation of the initial transfer. The consecrator never held the right to grant the temple permanent ownership, only a temporary lease up until the Jubilee. To extract value from this lease, the temple treasurer liquidates the asset. They sell the remaining years of land use to a new third-party buyer as the 50-year Jubilee deadline steadily approaches. Verse 24 dictates exactly what happens when that 50th year arrives. The land immediately vacates the possession of whichever buyer currently holds the lease. Rashi clarifies the scripture's phrasing, to whom the possession of the field belongs. He explains that this legal reversion bypasses both the temple treasurer and the individual who originally consecrated the field. Instead, the property rights snap all the way back to their origin. The field reverts entirely to the original ancestral owner who first sold it. Because the consecrator only owned a leasehold, they could only legally grant the temple a leasehold. The earthly limits of property seamlessly map onto and constrain the mechanics of heavenly consecration. Moving from real estate to livestock, verse 26 introduces another boundary to human consecration, the law of the Bechor, or the firstborn animal. The verse establishes a strict limitation. A person cannot take a firstborn clean animal, such as an ox or a sheep, and consecrate it to serve as a different type of voluntary sacrifice. Rashi deduces the legal mechanism from a single phrase, for it is not his. The animal cannot be assigned a new sacred status because it is born with a pre-existing lien. From the exact moment it is born, the firstborn animal inherently belongs to God. This creates a sharp contrast with the purchased field. Land involves human-assigned sanctity, temporarily leased from an ancestor. The firstborn's title involves inherent sanctity, held exclusively by the divine. The practical restriction is absolute. The farmer possesses the physical animal and is responsible for raising it, but they lack the legal title required to alter its designated theological purpose. Human-assigned sanctity cannot override inherent divine sanctity. A person simply cannot redirect the purpose of an asset they do not exclusively own. This brings us to a complex textual ambiguity in verse 27, which begins, "And if it be of an unclean animal." Its immediate proximity to the previous law makes it a target for misinterpretation. This decision tree diagrams the initial surface-level assumption. Because the previous verse discussed firstborns, one might assume the top branch is correct, that verse 27 refers to the firstborn of an unclean animal, specifically a donkey, but external statutory rules already govern that exact case. Based on Exodus 13, a firstborn donkey must be redeemed specifically with a lamb, and that lamb must be given directly to a priest. Compare that to the specific rules stated directly in verse 27. It mandates a monetary valuation, an erech-plus, plus a 1/5 penalty, with the proceeds paid into the temple treasury. Rashi deconstructs the text by pointing out the impossibility of this overlap. These two sets of redemption requirements are mathematically and legally incompatible. Having eliminated the firstborn hypothesis, Rashi identifies the correct legal pathway. Verse 27 refers to the general voluntary dedication of an unclean animal, liquidated to fund Bedek Habayit, the physical repair of the temple. By resolving this, Rashi proves that the text has shifted focus once again, moving away from inherent sanctity and back to the mechanics of human-assigned sanctity. Rabbinic interpretation does not rely on guesswork. It relies on cross-referencing systemic statutory mechanics to eliminate legal contradictions and derive the precise meaning of the text. Verse 28 introduces the final and most extreme asset category in this framework, Cherem, which translates to doomed or prescribed items. Cherem carries a unique and unyielding legal power. As the text states, it shall not be sold nor redeemed. It represents absolute, irrevocable, assigned sanctity. This split-screen flowchart maps a fundamental Talmudic dispute, cited by Rashi, regarding an unspecified cherem. When an owner declares an item doomed without naming a beneficiary, does it route left to the priests or right to the temple treasury? The legal consequence depends entirely on the destination. Under the priest's interpretation, once the asset crosses the threshold into the priest's possession, it becomes their private, utterly unredeemable property. Under the temple interpretation, the asset receives most holy status. This grants the cherem the power to completely supersede and overwrite any previous, lesser religious vows attached to the item. We can now see the full architecture of Leviticus 27. We analyze the temporarily leased field, the inherently holy firstborn, the assessed unclean animal, and the irrevocable cherem. Together, these four categories map the entire spectrum of ancient property rights, scaling from the temporary transfer of usufruct all the way to absolute, irreversible ownership. The biblical legal code does not treat religious devotion as a mechanism to bypass civil law. Instead, it reveals a highly structured economic framework where the ability to transact with the divine is inextricably bound by precise, earthly definitions of property rights and pre-existing sanctity.